Taiping Rebellion. In the mid-19th century, China was engulfed in the Taiping Rebellion, one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Lasting from 1850 to 1864, this vast civil war claimed an estimated 20 to 30 million lives. At its heart was Hong Xiuquan, a failed scholar who proclaimed himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ and vowed to establish a heavenly kingdom of great peace. His movement spread like wildfire across 17 provinces, crippling Qing rule and unleashing chaos on a scale the world had rarely witnessed. The rebellion combined fiery religious zeal with radical reforms. Hong's followers rejected Confucian traditions, promoted gender equality, and sought to abolish practices like foot binding. In 1853, they captured Nanjing and renamed it Tianjing, or Heavenly Capital, establishing it as the seat of their new kingdom. For over a decade, Qing forces fought desperately to crush the movement, relying heavily on regional militias, Western weaponry, and foreign advisors. Battles consumed entire populations, famine devastated the countryside, and disease spread unchecked, magnifying the death toll. By 1864, Qing forces finally recaptured Nanjing in a brutal climax known as the Third Battle of Nanjing. The city was ravaged, 200,000 to 300,000 civilians were massacred, and Tianjing was reduced to ashes. The rebellion ended, but its legacy was catastrophic. Tens of millions lay dead, China's economy lay shattered, and the Qing dynasty was left permanently weakened, setting the stage for further decline and foreign intrusion. What was meant to be a heavenly kingdom of peace instead became a nightmare etched in history as one of the deadliest uprisings ever recorded. Anlushan Rebellion. In the mid-8th century, the Tang dynasty, then at the height of its power, was thrown into turmoil by the Anlushan Rebellion. Beginning on December 16, 755, General Anlushan, once a trusted frontier commander, turned his armies against the dynasty he was meant to protect. Within months, his forces stormed Luoyang and advanced on Chang'an, forcing Emperor Xuanzong to abandon the capital. What followed was nearly 8 years of devastating conflict, ending only on February 17, 763, with the collapse of the rebel Yan dynasty. The human toll was catastrophic. Contemporary census figures show the Tang Empire's recorded population plummeting from about 52.9 million before the uprising to just 16.9 million afterward. While many of these missing millions were uncounted due to the breakdown of administration and taxation, modern scholarship converges around an estimate of roughly 13 million deaths, still one of the bloodiest conflicts in recorded history. Hunger, disease, massacres, and forced displacements left entire regions emptied of life, turning once thriving provinces into wastelands. The rebellion left scars that the dynasty never fully healed. Though the Tang survived, it emerged weakened, its golden age irreparably dimmed. Trust between the throne and its generals was shattered, and the empire's political and economic structures never regained their former strength. By the way, I will be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I would greatly appreciate it if you could show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Dungan Revolt. In the mid-19th century, northwest China was engulfed by one of the deadliest uprisings the world has ever seen, the Dungan Revolt, also known as the Hui Muslim Rebellion. Beginning in 1862 and lasting until 1877, it erupted from long-standing ethnic and religious tensions, oppressive taxation, and deep mistrust between the Hui Muslim communities and the ruling Qing dynasty. What started as scattered clashes soon spiraled into a full-scale war that devastated entire provinces and left millions dead. The scale of destruction was staggering. In Shanxi province alone, an estimated 6.2 million people perished, nearly half the population, as scorched earth tactics, massacres, and famine ravaged the land. In Gansu, the toll was even more catastrophic, with 14.5 million lives lost, amounting to almost 3/4 of its people. Entire Hui Muslim communities were annihilated, their cities and villages reduced to ashes, while survivors were forced to flee or starve. Northern Xinjiang also suffered heavily, losing more than 340,000 people, nearly 3/4 of its population. By the time the Qing dynasty finally crushed the rebellion in 1877, northwest China had been transformed into a wasteland. The combined death toll of the revolt is estimated at around 20 to 21 million lives, making it one of the bloodiest conflicts in recorded history. For the Hui Muslims, it marked near extinction in some provinces, while for the Qing dynasty, victory came at a devastating cost that weakened its grip on power. Miao Rebellion. In the mid-19th century, as the Qing dynasty struggled to contain the chaos of the Taiping Rebellion, another devastating conflict erupted in the rugged mountains of Guizhou. This was the Miao Rebellion, beginning in 1854 and dragging on until 1873. It was not a short-lived revolt, but a brutal 20-year struggle, fought largely by the Miao and other ethnic groups who had endured centuries of marginalization, heavy taxation, and encroachment on their lands. What started as localized resistance soon expanded into a sprawling conflict across Guizhou and into neighboring provinces like Hunan and Guangxi. The war was waged with unrelenting ferocity. Qing forces responded with harsh, scorched earth tactics, burning villages, destroying crops, and forcing populations into starvation. The Miao fighters, deeply familiar with their mountainous terrain, resisted with determination and guerrilla tactics that prolonged the rebellion for nearly 2 decades. The human toll was catastrophic. Some modern estimates, including those cited by historians, place the death toll at more than 4 million, with one figure as high as 4.9 million, a number often considered an upper bound but still reflecting the immense scale of destruction. The conflict left Guizhou devastated, with vast stretches of farmland turned to wasteland and entire communities annihilated. By the time Qing authority was reasserted in 1873, the region lay in ruins. Travelers in the years afterward described depopulated valleys and empty villages, haunting reminders of the war's devastation. The Qing dynasty had quelled the uprising, but at a staggering human cost that rivaled the deadliest conflicts of the era. The Panthay Rebellion was one of the most devastating uprisings of the 19th century, yet it remains far less known than other Chinese civil wars. From 1856 to 1873, the Hui Muslims of Yunnan rose against the Qing dynasty after years of discrimination, violent clashes, and heavy-handed crackdowns. Under the leadership of Du Wengxiu, they carved out an independent sultanate based in Dali, known as the Pingyan Guo, or Pacified Southern Kingdom. For nearly 2 decades, this Muslim-led state stood in open defiance of Beijing, with its own administration, military, and vision of survival against a hostile empire. The rebellion was not a small frontier conflict. It was a drawn-out war marked by scorched earth campaigns and mass killings. Qing forces launched relentless expeditions into Yunnan, determined to wipe out the rebels. Villages were burned, towns were massacred, and both sides committed acts of ferocity that deepened the cycle of vengeance. By the 1870s, the Qing had mobilized overwhelming manpower to crush the Sultanate once and for all. In 1873, imperial armies stormed Dali after a brutal siege. Facing certain defeat, Du Wengxiu poisoned himself rather than be paraded as a captive. His head was severed, preserved in honey, and sent to Beijing as proof of the dynasty's victory. The human cost was catastrophic. Historians estimate that around 1 million people perished in the rebellion, victims of massacres, executions, famine, and disease. Some modern scholarship suggests the true toll may have reached up to 3 million, particularly as plague outbreaks spread amid the chaos of war. Yunnan, once a thriving crossroads of trade and culture, was left devastated and depopulated. The Panthay Rebellion ended in utter destruction, remembered not only as a fight for autonomy, but as one of the bloodiest uprisings ever recorded in world history. Haitian Revolution. In 1791, the French colony of Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, erupted into one of the bloodiest uprisings the world has ever seen. Enslaved men and women, forced to labor on the richest sugar colony of the era, rose against a system of brutal exploitation. What began as scattered revolts quickly escalated into a full-scale revolution that would last over a decade. By its end in 1804, Haiti stood free as the first Black republic, but the cost was staggering. Historians estimate that around 200,000 Haitians lost their lives, with some accounts placing the toll as high as 350,000, alongside tens of thousands of French troops, colonists, and British soldiers. The Haitian Revolution unfolded in waves of relentless violence. At its heart were leaders like Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who forged an army out of the enslaved population, defeating not only French colonists, but also foreign powers eager to seize the island. Disease and combat devastated European armies. Britain alone is estimated to have lost around 45,000 men, while French casualties climbed to tens of thousands, including nearly 75,000 soldiers and colonists. Plantations were burned, entire towns destroyed, and the island descended into a war of annihilation where survival often came at the price of unimaginable bloodshed. By January 1, 1804, Dessalines declared Haiti's independence, delivering a crushing blow to European colonial empires. Yet victory came with rivers of blood. The 1804 Haitian massacre alone claimed between 3,000 and 7,000 remaining Europeans, part of a broader conflict that left hundreds of thousands dead. The Haitian Revolution was not just a fight against slavery, it was a seismic event that reshaped global history, inspiring oppressed peoples worldwide and terrifying slaveholding societies across the Americas. The price of freedom was almost unbearably high, but Haiti's triumph proved that even the most brutal empire could be broken. Indian Rebellion of 1857. In May 1857, India exploded in revolt. What began at the military cantonment of Meerut, when sepoys, Indian soldiers serving under the East India Company, refused cartridges rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, soon spread across northern and central India. Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow became the epicenters of a vast uprising that sought to expel British authority. To many, it was the first Great War of Independence. To the British, it was a mutiny threatening the very foundation of empire. The fighting was fierce and merciless. Rebels seized Delhi and proclaimed the aging Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II as their leader. In Kanpur, British civilians were massacred, and in turn, the British retaliated with executions and the burning of villages. At Lucknow, the siege of the Residency became one of the defining struggles of the rebellion. For nearly 2 years, from 1857 to 1859, the subcontinent was drenched in blood as battles, reprisals, and atrocities claimed lives on an immense scale. The cost was catastrophic. Contemporary estimates spoke of hundreds of thousands dead, and modern scholarship places the toll far higher. Around 6,000 British soldiers and civilians lost their lives, but the true devastation was borne by Indians. Between the combat, retribution, famine, and epidemic disease that followed, as many as 800,000 Indians may have perished. The uprising ended in failure for the rebels, but it brought an end to the East India Company's rule. In 1858, the British Crown assumed direct control over India, ushering in the era of the Raj. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 left scars that ran deep across both nations. It was not only one of the bloodiest uprisings of the 19th century, it was a turning point that reshaped the relationship between Britain and India, setting the stage for the independent struggles that would follow in the century to come. War in the Vendée. In the aftermath of the French Revolution, when liberty, equality, and fraternity were rallying cries across France, a different story unfolded in the countryside of the Vendée. From 1793 to 1796, this region became the stage for one of the bloodiest uprisings of the Revolutionary era. Sparked by anger over forced conscription and the suppression of the Catholic Church, peasants and local nobles rose in defiance against the new republic. What followed was not just a rebellion, but a savage civil war. Recent academic estimates place the death toll at around 170,000 insurgents and civilians, with an additional 30,000 Republican soldiers killed. Nearly 200,000 lives lost in just 3 years. The uprising began with poorly armed peasants taking up scythes, pitchforks, and hunting rifles against trained Republican armies. At first, the rebels scored surprising victories, fueled by loyalty to their faith and traditions. But the Republic's response was swift and merciless. To stamp out resistance, Republican leaders sent in the infamous Infernal Columns, troops who swept through the Vendée, burning villages, executing suspected sympathizers, and leaving devastation in their path. Civilians, caught between rebel militias and state armies, suffered the heaviest losses. The conflict became a cycle of ambushes, reprisals, and massacres, where entire communities were wiped out in the name of revolutionary order. By 1796, the Vendéan resistance was crushed, but the cost was staggering. The war in the Vendée left not only mass graves, but also deep scars in French history. Bar Kokhba Revolt. In the year 132 CE, Judea became the stage of one of the bloodiest uprisings the Roman Empire ever faced, the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Led by Simon Bar Kokhba, a man hailed by many Jews as a messianic figure, the rebellion erupted in defiance of Emperor Hadrian's policies, including the construction of a Roman colony, Aelia Capitolina, on the ruins of Jerusalem. What began as a daring insurgency quickly escalated into a desperate struggle for survival. Guerrilla tactics and fortified hideouts gave the rebels early momentum, but their defiance would provoke Rome's full military wrath. For 4 years, from 132 to 136 CE, the revolt raged with catastrophic intensity. Ancient historian Cassius Dio recorded that more than 580,000 Jews were killed in battles and raids, with another 500 fortified outposts and 985 villages destroyed across the land. Beyond the battlefield, famine, disease, and fire claimed countless additional lives, creating devastation so vast that Dio described the entire province as nearly desolate. Modern historians, such as Hannah Cotton and the research team of Devere Raviv and Chaim Ben David, have argued that these figures align with Roman census records and archaeological evidence, making them highly credible. The uprising was not merely crushed, it was systematically obliterated by Rome's scorched earth strategy, under the command of the general Julius Severus. The aftermath reshaped Jewish history. Hadrian barred Jews from entering Jerusalem, rebuilt it as Aelia Capitolina, and symbolically renamed the province Syria Palestina in an attempt to erase Jewish identity from their homeland. Entire communities were scattered, and the dream of national independence was violently extinguished. The Bar Kokhba revolt left behind a staggering death toll, immense cultural loss, and a scar that shaped centuries of exile. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944 stands as one of the most devastating episodes of World War II. Beginning on August 1, 1944, and lasting until October 2, the campaign spanned 63 days of relentless combat. The Polish underground resistance, known as the Home Army, rose in defiance against Nazi Germany, determined to reclaim their capital before the advancing Soviet Red Army arrived. However, what began as a bold gamble for freedom quickly turned into a catastrophic bloodbath. Estimates suggest that 150,000 to 200,000 civilians, and in some accounts up to 250,000, were killed during the fighting, alongside some 15,000 to 20,000 Polish insurgents. The overwhelming majority of the dead were civilians, caught in a city that became a slaughterhouse. From the very beginning, the German response was merciless. Heavily armed Wehrmacht and SS forces unleashed brutal reprisals against the population. Entire neighborhoods were turned into killing fields. In early August, the Wola massacre saw tens of thousands of civilians executed within days, as Nazi units sought to terrorize Warsaw into submission. Still, the resistance fighters, outgunned, undersupplied, and isolated, held on with extraordinary courage, fighting street by street, often with makeshift weapons, in the ruins of their own homes. Every hour became a desperate struggle for survival, as civilians endured starvation, bombardment, and mass executions. When the uprising finally collapsed in October, Warsaw was left in ruins. Surviving residents were expelled, and Hitler's orders were carried out with ruthless precision. The city was to be obliterated. By January 1945, as much as 85% of Warsaw's buildings had been destroyed, an almost complete annihilation of a European capital. The uprising failed militarily, but its legacy endures. It remains a story of unimaginable sacrifice, a moment where courage collided with cruelty, and an entire city paid the price. Boxer Uprising. At the turn of the 20th century, China erupted in a violent struggle that shocked the world, the Boxer Uprising. Beginning in 1899, the movement was driven by the secret society known as the Yihequan, or Righteous and Harmonious Fists, later called Boxers, by foreigners. They were fiercely anti-foreign and anti-Christian, targeting missionaries and Chinese converts whom they saw as betraying their traditions. What started as local attacks soon spiraled into a nationwide uprising. By its end in 1901, an estimated 100,000 or more people had been killed, most of them Chinese civilians, including tens of thousands of Christians, alongside a few hundred foreign nationals. The uprising reached its peak in June 1900 with the infamous siege of the international legations in Beijing. For 55 harrowing days, diplomats, soldiers, missionaries, and civilians were besieged by Boxer forces, with elements of the Qing Imperial Army lending support. Cut off from the outside world, the defenders endured wave after wave of assaults until the eight-nation alliance, troops from Japan, Russia, Britain, France, the United States, Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, fought their way into the capital in August 1900. Their intervention was overwhelming, but it came at a devastating cost to China. Villages were burned, civilians slaughtered, and the Qing dynasty forced into submission. On September 7, 1901, China signed the Boxer Protocol, agreeing to massive indemnities, permanent foreign garrisons, and humiliating concessions that weakened imperial rule. The dynasty, already fragile, never recovered. Within a decade, it collapsed entirely. The Boxer Uprising was more than just a rebellion. It was a desperate clash of faith, nationalism, and survival that left rivers of blood across northern China. German Peasants' War. In the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, between 1524 and 1525, a storm of discontent erupted that would become one of Europe's deadliest uprisings, the German Peasants' War. Driven by crushing taxes, oppressive feudal obligations, and hopes ignited by the Protestant Reformation, more than 300,000 peasants, laborers, and even some disaffected nobles rose in defiance. They rallied around the 12 Articles, a manifesto calling for an end to serfdom, fair rents, and the freedom to choose their pastors. But while the call for reform burned brightly, the response from the rulers of the empire would be swift and merciless. At first, the rebels found success, overwhelming local garrisons and seizing castles across Swabia, Franconia, and Thuringia. Their movement spread like wildfire, yet divisions soon tore at the cause. Some groups sought peaceful reform inspired by religious ideals, while others turned to plunder, fueling fear and resentment. Martin Luther, who had inspired many with his defiance of church authority, shocked the peasants when he condemned the revolt after violence escalated. His pamphlet, urging princes to put down the rebellion without mercy, gave rulers both religious and political justification to crush the uprising with steel. By spring 1525, the balance had turned. Professional armies of nobles swept through the countryside with brutal efficiency. The Battle of Frankenhausen in May marked the bloodiest turning point, where thousands of peasants were slaughtered in open fields. Villages burned, survivors were executed, and any dream of peasant liberation was stamped out. Estimates of the dead vary, but most historians place the toll at around 100,000 lives lost. Some accounts suggesting slightly fewer, others closer to that full figure. In barely a year, the largest popular revolt in Europe before the French Revolution ended in devastation, leaving behind a grim lesson. In the struggle between oppressed masses and entrenched power, the price of rebellion could be nothing less than catastrophic. White Lotus Rebellion. In the late 18th century, the Qing dynasty faced one of its most destabilizing uprisings, the White Lotus Rebellion. Beginning in 1796, what started as a localized tax protest in the rugged provinces of central China quickly grew into a full-scale insurrection. The rebels were followers of the White Lotus sect, a millenarian movement that promised the arrival of a new Buddha and salvation for the oppressed. Thousands of peasants, weary of crushing taxes and corrupt officials, took up arms. Villages across Sichuan, Hubei, and Shanxi became the battlegrounds of a movement that mixed religious fervor with desperation. For nearly a decade, the Qing dynasty struggled to suppress the rebellion. Though the empire commanded immense military forces, its banner troops proved ineffective against the rebels' guerrilla tactics. Imperial armies were forced into long campaigns in remote mountain terrain, suffering heavy losses and draining the treasury. To turn the tide, the Qing relied on local gentry and militias, private Tuan forces raised at great cost. The war claimed an enormous toll, with about 100,000 rebels killed and countless civilians caught in the violence. By 1804, the rebellion had finally been crushed, but the cost went far beyond bloodshed. The conflict laid bare the dynasty's fragility. The reliance on local militias rather than imperial troops revealed deep structural weaknesses in the Qing military system. Though the dynasty survived, the White Lotus Rebellion exposed cracks that would only widen in the 19th century, foreshadowing even larger and deadlier uprisings such as the Taiping Rebellion. It was a warning that the Qing's grip on power was no longer unshakable. Maji Uprising. In the summer of 1905, in German East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, a massive revolt broke out that would become one of the bloodiest uprisings in colonial Africa. Known as the Maji Uprising, it was sparked by years of brutal colonial policies. German authorities had forced African communities to grow cotton for export, disrupting food supplies and livelihoods. Harsh taxation, forced labor, and violence from colonial officials fueled a storm of resentment. From July 1905, that anger erupted into armed resistance, as diverse ethnic groups united under a common belief in Meiji, a sacred water that, they thought, could protect them from German bullets. What began as scattered attacks quickly grew into a full-scale rebellion stretching across southern Tanzania. Villagers destroyed cotton fields, struck at German outposts, and sought to reclaim their independence. But the German response was devastating. Commanders turned to scorched earth tactics, systematically burning villages, destroying crops, and cutting off food supplies. One German officer even declared, "Only hunger and want can bring about a final submission." The strategy worked, not by defeating rebels in battle, but by starving entire populations into surrender. By the time the uprising was crushed in 1907, its toll was staggering. Scholars estimate that between 75,000 and 300,000 Africans died, the vast majority not in combat but from famine and disease directly caused by German policies. Communities were left in ruins, fields barren, and entire regions depopulated. The Paris Commune. In 1871, just months after France's humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, the capital became the stage for one of the bloodiest urban uprisings in modern European history. In March, ordinary Parisians, workers, artisans, and radicals seized control of their city, forming the Paris Commune. For more than 2 months, they experimented with a revolutionary government, defying both the Prussian occupiers outside and the French authorities in Versailles. But by late May, the dream of a Commune of Paris would come crashing down in a storm of fire and blood. From May 21st to May 28th, a period remembered as La Semaine Sanglante, the Bloody Week, Versailles troops launched their final assault. Street by street, house by house, the communards resisted with barricades, rifles, and desperation. Fires engulfed parts of the city, including the Tuileries Palace, as the defenders fought to the last. When the barricades fell, the retribution was swift and merciless. Historians debate the exact toll. Contemporary cemetery records confirm at least 6,667 communards killed, while 19th-century accounts claimed as many as 20,000. Most modern scholarship estimates 10,000 to 15,000 deaths during that single week, an urban massacre of staggering scale. Hundreds of government soldiers were also killed in the fighting, though the losses were far smaller compared to the slaughter of the insurgents. The fall of the Paris Commune left an indelible scar. Tens of thousands more were captured, with many sent to prisons or deported to distant colonies. If you enjoyed this video, I will be posting more interesting videos on the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.